This is the Simply Love Jesus podcast, where we explore life and faith through the lens of one question. What does it mean to simply love Jesus? My name is Jacob New, and this is part 2 of our series on leadership. If you haven't listened to the previous episode, we would love if you did that. This way you can be a part of the full conversation. Enjoy the episode.
Well, think about this. When Jesus was being tried for crucifixion, were people following him anymore? And the moment that he was arrested and he was going through trial and he was being crucified, he was completely alone. Everyone had deserted him. And yet, he was still a leader. Leadership is not something that is just given to you. It is something that you must choose and actively decide to be, is to be a leader in whatever you do.
I'd say that there's two types of leadership. What you're describing there is definitely the lead by example, where people will see what you're doing and follow after it, like stacking chairs in church.
Yeah, but that's still a leader.
Yeah. After thinking about it for a while, that's kind of what I've come to. And then there's also the leader where it's like the leader of the Bible study or leader of a small group or something like that, where they're actively teaching people. So what would be the difference, or can you do both? You can obviously do both, but should you be doing both? I don't know.
I think you should definitely devote yourself to one before the other. I think if someone is setting out to have people to follow them, they're going to fail. But if you devote yourself to being the example first, regardless of anyone is following you or not, then you will be set up for success.
Define
this is why
fail.
we have what do you say that again?
Define fail. If you're setting out to have people follow you.
Well, I would say failure in leadership is when you do not properly shepherd the people who are following you.
Okay.
What is the measure to a successful leader?
Yeah, with that, Caleb, I think that in every different situation, because there's tons of different types of leaders. There's military leaders, there's relational leaders, there's all these sorts of leaders, and I think with every new situation that a leader's in, there's different standards,
Yeah.
So
but what if you're looking at a general standard for leadership? What is a general measure to know an effective leader?
I don't think that it's a one size fits all kind of thing. I think that with every situation, your standards of a good leader in the military are going to be much, much different than a personal mentor.
Okay, but even in the scenario of a military leader and a personal mentor, there's still common traits that those two things share. That would still make them that is still attributing to success. So let's say a military leader and a mentor still have to be able to effectively inspire and influence those who they are teaching or those who are following them, right? So that would be a shared quality between a mentor-like relationship and a military leader. They both have to instill inspiration, and it's to pave a path for people. It's to effectively inspire and motivate the people who follow them or their teaching. And so there's a shared common denominator there. But if there is no measure for expectation, then anything can be successful at that point. So there has to be some kind of measure for what defines it as successful or good or whatever. Adolf Hitler failed as a leader because of the results of where the people who followed them ended up. I know at the end of the day, I would ultimately say that every person, at least for me, a measure of success is whether you're preparing people and building them to become the best version of themselves. It's you're trying to build people to a better place for a common greater good. And Hitler rallied his whole country and towards what? Prejudice and genocide. It violates a moral law.
Yeah, he was a very effective leader, but he was a very immoral and evil one.
Yeah, and so therefore I would say he failed as a leader. So, how do you properly measure success as a leader?
I would say one of the biggest things is if your mission or your goal or what you're leading people towards, if that gets accomplished, that's the biggest telltale sign of a success.
Mm-hmm.
But not always, though. Actually, I kind of disagree with that because, like we were talking about with Hitler, like he got his goal, but then he was also a bad leader at the same time.
I mean, it looks like, in my opinion, this depends, like, if they, like, reach their goal. Because, like, every leader probably has, like, a goal of, like, what they want done, you know? Like, they probably set the goals themselves. So if they reach those, I don't think you can necessarily, like, say they're a failure or they're a success, like, if they're good or bad, if it worked out, like, based off what their people do. Because there can be, like, a really good leader that the people that follow him fail. You know, like, Jesus is obviously a leader to us, and we fail Jesus all the time. So, like,
Yeah.
just because, like, a leader has people that fail, I wouldn't say that they're, like, a failed leader. But I'd just honestly say, like, if they reach their goal, you know, whatever's set out for them, if they reach their goal, and they're, like, I don't know, just, they, like, constantly just provide, like, good leadership for people, like, always there for people, I'd say is
Yeah.
what I just find as, like, success as a leader.
It's interesting because I believe, like, when you see in scripture, the Bible defines leadership in such a drastically different way, or the measure for leadership in the Bible is drastically different than what we would do in the world, because I would argue that in scripture, biblically, like, a person is a good leader when they are successfully leading people away from themselves. Like, you're successfully pulling people out of their following their selfish nature, and more when they're following towards they're running after Jesus. They are trying to it's when you are you're leading people away from their selfishness towards reflecting the image of God. And so biblically, that's what it would be.
Yeah, Caleb, to
And
add on
I
to
would
that.
say-
I mean, no, you finish your thought.
I was just gonna say that what I find interesting is when I would see what measures a successful leader, I look at their results. Like, what is produced by your results? You know, you look at people who lead people towards reflecting the image of God, and what is resulted in that. That is resulted in people who are filled with humility and generosity and compassion. People who are caring for others and caring for those who are less fortunate. Whereas someone who is not motivated by that, someone who's motivated by their own selfish nature and just getting people to a goal, you usually find out it ends up being like Disney, like Bob Iger and the Disney Corporation. It's like the epitome of corporate world, where they decided they needed to save some extra bucks. So what did they do when the coronavirus hit? They told their people they had 2 days to pack up their stuff and get out of Disney, all their college students, and they just canceled their college program right then and there. It was like on March 12th, they gave them they only gave them like a couple, like maybe 2 weeks notice that they're going to be literally canceling the program, the whole program due to the coronavirus, and they had to pack up their stuff and go home. And the problem was that, is I know that for a fact they probably did little to nothing to actually help. Like, you have a bunch of international students in their program, and those people had no way to get home because there's no international travel allowed. But they were just up and fired, basically, and they were up and let go at that point, and they just dropped them and left them for nothing. Why? Because the motivator for the corporates at Disney is money. It's not actually caring for their people. It's not actually caring for the families. They don't give a crap about that. It's all about money to them. And so that's a result of people who are leading based on their selfish nature. And so I look at the results produced by leadership, and that's when I look at it and say, is that truly effective? Is that truly a good measure? Is that truly providing good, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I agree. But the problem is nowadays, like, every major company, like, is that way. You know, like, everyone cares about money more than actually helping people. A lot of, like, major CEOs and companies. So I'd say there's a lot of bad leadership in our world today as opposed to good leadership. There's still some good leaders, but not a lot that are, like, big time, like, corporate and stuff like that.
Should we compromise our standards for leadership simply because everyone else is doing a crappy job?
No.
Of course not. No.
Yeah.
And it's important that there's got to be people who are raising their voice, who are deciding that they're not going to compromise what they're doing and their ethic and their passion simply because other people are failing. And that's why I think it actually goes back to what I was originally saying, that leadership is someone who is paving the way for others. And a leader, that's what a leader is, and that's what the qualities of true leadership is paving the way for others, because that's a person who refuses to compromise their values, their passion, and their desires simply because other people are doing a bad job, you know? That's like, it's like, even if no one in the world were still good leaders, if you're still choosing to stand up and say, no, this is proper leadership, guess what? You're being a leader. You're refusing to compromise your position and refusing to compromise in the hopes that other people will eventually see your example and follow that. Or even if nobody does, it's the regardless of care, whether anyone follows it or not, I refuse to back down.
Yeah.
And you are owning your independence in that. And I think that is an example of how you can be a leader without actually having followers. You may gain followers, but it's not about gaining followers isn't the goal, and you would still be doing it even if you didn't have followers, you know?
Yeah. No,
I think
agree
there's
with
like
that perfectly.
I think there's like three main things that we've picked up so far about what a good leader is. I think one is that they actually pave the way for others to follow, and two is that their intentions in leading are moral and they're good and they're not evil, like Hitler obviously. And three, that they're very strong and concrete in what they believe. You have to have compassion for your followers, but you also have to understand that there's a mission that needs to be accomplished, you know? I think a good leader, this is kind of a little bit off the question, but I think that a good leader has compassion for their followers, but they also don't get too close attached that they can't see the big view of what they're where they're trying to go.
Is that an actual good leader, or is that simply a negotiable quality of what leaders can do?
Yeah.
You know?
I would say it's a good, I think that having that, being able to ride that fine line is what a good leader does, because with that whole Disney situation was they had a lack of compassion for their followers, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think that if you have too much compassion for your followers, that can work to your detriment, but also having a lack of compassion like this whole Disney situation does too.
Well, okay,
Yeah.
I'd say there's a point where you draw the line. I'd say like the main distinction between a good leader and a bad leader is what their what their desire is. So basically, like, I'd say a bad leader has selfish ambitions, you know, or ambition, not desire. Like, their ambition is selfish, is what can I do for me? Like, how can I better my life by my position that I'm in, you know? Like a king, for example, it's I want money from people, so I'm gonna raise taxes or whatever, blah blah blah. But I'd say a good leader is someone that's you know, how can I make others' lives better? How can I help other people? You know, it all depends on what's in their heart, and whether it's good desires for the people or bad. That's the difference for me is between a good leader and a bad leader. Because every good leader has good intentions for the people. Every bad leader has good intentions for themselves and how they can help themselves out. It all comes down to whether it's selfish or not, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'd 100% agree with that. It's a lot of it's in the heart and what you're truly trying to do. If you're kind of what Micah was saying, if you're trying to just make money, then you know you may be successful in making money, but it doesn't matter on the eternal scale. And you see companies that stick out, going back to versus Disney or things like that, where you see companies stick out that do it right, like Chick-fil-A, and they're known for their customer service and caring about others, and they benefit from that.
There's a guy who's a really good speaker on leadership. His name's Simon Sinek, and he was talking about how millennials specifically, he was in a segment talking about them in the workplace or whatever, and he made this statement. He said, people don't quit jobs, they just quit bosses.
Yeah, that's way too true.
And I think any good any good boss has to be a good leader, because it doesn't matter. It shows that it doesn't matter what business you're doing, what product you're selling. It doesn't matter what you're doing, so long as you are feeling led. And where I think the undertones of that is someone who's feeling led. What do you think you would feel if you're feeling led? Like, what are things that you would feel?
Feel like
If you're
Yeah, I feel like in some
feel
sense, like you're being like your strengths
are
are being used if you're being led, like in like a team project. If someone's like you do this because you're good at this, and then like you feel good about that. If it's
Yeah, well, think of times where you have felt led well by a person, and what about that like person made you feel like you are being led well? So name one person that you feel like has led you well in your life at any point.
Probably like my dad or something.
Okay. And so what about your dad? Do you feel like why do you feel like he's led you well?
There's a whole bunch of reasons, but I think one of the biggest things is that he like shows me how to do something, but he still lets me do it by myself. So I reap my own I reap my own reward.
Good leaders, so in that sense, good leaders don't just show you things, they equip you.
Yeah.
Good leaders equip you.
They don't hold your hand. They let you get your hands a little dirty.
Micah, what about you? Who's someone in your life that has led you well?
Well, I mean, I would say like on a personal level, I would go personal. But since Griffin did, I'll change it up. I'll go work. Like when I'm going to work, like I remember at times like when I worked in the pizza place for Hy-Vee and I like the Italian section or whatever, I had a really bad manager. I remember like every time I went to work, like he was so bad and he didn't lead well that I almost didn't want to do my job well. Like it made me want to be like, you know what, I don't like you, so I'm not going to work hard for you. But then other times I had like good bosses where like this is where I just find like if like someone's leading well is like when you go to work and like you generally want to put forth your best effort to help this person out because you know like they're leading you well, like you're on the same page, like you want to actually work for them. You know, like that's what I'd say someone's a good leader. If like you want to do your best to like absolutely like give your all to them and like help them out and the best way you can, like that's they're a good leader.
Yeah. Well, and you even touched on an example of a good measure for a leader is shown by its results, because if someone is a bad leader, you're going to produce bad workers because they're not going to want to give their best effort. But if you're being led well by a good leader, you're going to give your hardest effort because you feel like you're being led well.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, I remember working like in the garden center last summer. Like I knew nothing about flowers and stuff, and my two bosses were like they were really smart. They knew what they were doing, but they were just bad leaders. Like I had no desire to like want to work for them just because of the stuff, like the way they led was not very nice. So then it made me in my own sense want to be a leader myself. Cause like, I may not know anything about what I'm doing, but like the way I work and the way like that I respond to them is like how I lead as well, just by like example. So that's kind of like what I would like to do with like when I work for like bad leaders like that. But yeah.
Jacob, what about you? Who is someone that you would say has led you well?
Yeah, I'd say just thinking back to high school, Jacob VP all 4 years of high school was a great leader to me, and whenever I needed him, like I'd text him and he would like, yo, what's up? Want to meet up or something like that. He's always there, and the fact that like I knew that he cared and like really cared about me, like made it so much easier to go up and talk to him and see what his opinion was on different things.
Yeah. So what I've gathered so far is that good leaders are available for you, good leaders equip you, and good leaders inspire you to be your best.